The bullet missed Nora Zimmerman's head by 3 inches, embedding itself in the wooden post behind her, but she never stopped whistling the waltz that had been dancing through her lips since breakfast. Fort Davis, Texas in 1878 was the kind of place where gunfire punctuated conversation, and Nora had learned long ago that fear only ruined a good melody. She stood in the dusty street outside the Mercantile, her auburn hair catching the harsh September sun, fingers wrapped around a bundle of fabric she had just purchased, and finished the entire piece before turning to see who had been careless enough to nearly end her life. The shooter was already being wrestled to the ground by 2 ranch hands, drunk and belligerent even at 10 in the morning. Nora shook her head and resumed her walk down the main thoroughfare, immediately transitioning into a lively Irish jig that seemed to make the very air around her dance. She had been born with this gift, this ability to hear a tune once and reproduce it perfectly through pursed lips, and in the 22 years since her arrival into this world, she had collected melodies like other women collected china patterns. Preston Sutherland heard her before he saw her. He was leading his sorrel mare to the water trough when the sound reached him, clear and pure as spring water, cutting through the usual cacophony of Fort Davis with startling precision. The tune was unfamiliar to him, something with a European flavor, all minor keys and melancholy beauty. Without thinking, he found himself humming along, picking up the melody easily even though he had never heard it before. His humming was rough, unpracticed, but it held the tune well enough. "You have a good ear," Nora said, stopping directly in front of him. She was shorter than he expected, barely reaching his shoulder, with eyes the color of creek stones and a smile that suggested she knew more than she let on. Preston removed his hat, suddenly aware of the trail dust covering his clothes and the fact that he had not shaved in 3 days. "That was beautiful. What was it, Chopin?" "A nocturne. I heard a pianist play it in San Antonio 2 years ago." She shifted her bundle to her other arm. "I am Nora Zimmerman, Preston Sutherland. I work the cattle drive routes, but I am staying here for a few weeks while my brother recovers from a broken leg." He gestured vaguely toward the boarding house at the end of the street. "Then you will be here long enough to learn whether you truly have an ear for music, or if that was merely luck." She smiled again, this time with a challenge in her expression. Most people cannot hold a tune to save their lives. Before Preston could respond, she was whistling again, this time something faster and more complex, full of trills and runs that seemed impossible to produce without an instrument. She walked away as she played, and Preston found himself watching her disappear into the seamstress shop, the melody lingering in the air long after she had gone. That night, lying on the narrow bed in the room he shared with his brother Marcus, Preston could not stop thinking about the woman who whistled like a bird and walked through near-death experiences without flinching. Marcus snored in the bed across from him, his broken leg elevated on a stack of pillows, but Preston remained wide awake, replaying the Chopin melody in his head and trying to remember exactly how her face had looked in the sunlight. "You are thinking too loud," Marcus mumbled without opening his eyes. "Go to sleep. I met someone today, a woman. How did you know? Because you have that stupid sound in your voice, that hopeful sound that men get when they are about to do something foolish." Marcus shifted his leg carefully. "What is her name?" "Nora Zimmerman. She whistles." "Everyone whistles, not like her. She can whistle anything, perfectly. I have never heard anything like it." Marcus opened one eye and studied his younger brother in the darkness. "You hummed along, did you not? How did you know that?" "Because you have been humming since you came back this evening. Same tune, over and over." Marcus closed his eye again. "Be careful, Preston. Women with unusual talents tend to be unusual in other ways too." But Preston was already thinking about where he might encounter Nora again, what excuse he could manufacture to cross her path, whether she might whistle for him once more. He found her the next morning at the edge of town, sitting on a flat rock near the creek with her shoes off and her feet dangling in the water. She was whistling something slow and sweet, and when she saw him approaching, she did not stop, merely acknowledged him with a slight nod. Preston sat down a respectful distance away and listened, and when he had learned the melody well enough, he began to hum along. They sat that way for nearly an hour, him humming, her whistling, the creek providing a gentle accompaniment. When she finally stopped, Preston felt as though he had been in church, that same sense of peace and rightness settling over him. "You really do have an ear for it," Nora said, wiggling her toes in the water. "Most people need to hear something 5 or 6 times before they can carry the tune properly. I have always been good with music, but I never had the opportunity to learn an instrument, wrong profession for it." Preston picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. "What was that one?" "Something my mother used to sing. She was German, came over when she was 16. She taught me dozens of songs before she died." Nora pulled her feet from the water and began drying them with her stockings. "My father never liked her singing. Said it reminded him too much of her, made the house feel haunted, but I kept the melodies. I kept every single one. I am sorry about your mother. It was 10 years ago. The grief has dulled." She pulled on her shoes with practiced efficiency. "Are you going to follow me around Fort Davis whistling and humming, or was this a coincidence?" Preston felt heat rise to his face. "I was hoping it might be a pattern we could establish. Honesty, I like that." Nora stood and brushed off her skirt. "Come to the social hall tomorrow evening. They are having a dance, and I have been asked to provide some of the music. You can hum along if you keep up." She walked away before he could respond, but Preston noticed that she was whistling something bright and cheerful, something that sounded almost like laughter. The social hall was packed with ranchers, soldiers from the nearby fort, and townspeople eager for entertainment. Preston arrived early, his hair slicked back with water, wearing his cleanest shirt and the bolo tie that had belonged to his father. Marcus had insisted on coming despite his broken leg, claiming he would go insane if he spent another evening staring at the boarding house walls. Nora stood at the front of the hall with 3 musicians, a fiddler, a man with a guitar, and another with a banjo. She wore a dress the color of deep water, and her hair was pinned up in a style that revealed the elegant line of her neck. When she began to whistle, the entire room fell silent. The first tune was a popular waltz, and couples immediately took to the floor, but Preston could not move. He was transfixed by the sight of her, by the way her whole body seemed to become part of the music. The evening progressed with dance after dance, and Nora proved herself to be an entire orchestra contained in one person. She whistled reels and waltzes, polkas and schottisches, never missing a note, never losing her breath. During a brief intermission, Preston finally worked up the courage to approach her. "You are remarkable," he said simply. "You have not hummed along once." Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "I am disappointed. I was too busy watching. Watching is fine, but participating is better." She accepted a glass of water from one of the organizers and drank deeply. "The next set is all requests. What would you like to hear?" "I do not know enough songs to request anything properly." "Then I will teach you." She set down her glass and took his hand, leading him out onto the floor as the musicians struck up a simple 2-step. "Listen first, then hum. Do not think about it too much." Preston was not a graceful dancer, but he managed to avoid stepping on her feet as they moved around the floor. Nora whistled directly to him, a melody that was easy to follow, and soon he was humming along, their voices blending in a way that felt natural and right. Other dancers moved around them, but Preston felt as though they were alone, connected by the invisible thread of music. "Better," Nora said when the song ended. "Much better." They danced 3 more times that evening, and each time Preston felt himself falling a little further into something he could not name. It was not just attraction, though he certainly felt that. It was something deeper, a sense that this woman understood something fundamental about the world that he had been missing his entire life. When the dance finally ended near midnight, Preston walked Nora back to her small house on the quiet end of town. She lived alone, she explained, making her living by taking in sewing and occasionally performing at events like tonight. "My father died 2 years ago," she said as they stood on her porch. "He left me the house and enough money to get by if I am careful. People think it is strange, a woman living alone, but I prefer it to the alternative." "What alternative?" "Marriage to someone who does not understand me, who would want me to be quieter, smaller, less myself." She looked at him directly. "I will not be diminished for the comfort of a man." "I would never want that," Preston said quietly. "You are perfect exactly as you are." Nora studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Come back tomorrow, I will teach you more songs." Over the next 2 weeks, Preston spent every available moment with Nora. They met by the creek each morning, where she would whistle and he would hum, learning melodies from across the world. She taught him Irish ballads and Spanish love songs, French cabaret tunes and Italian arias. His humming grew stronger and more confident, until they could harmonize together, creating something that was more than the sum of its parts. In the afternoons, Preston helped with odd jobs around town to earn extra money, but his mind was always on Nora, on the next song they would learn, the next conversation they would have. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother's flower garden and her father's print shop. He told her about growing up on a small ranch in New Mexico, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the loneliness of the cattle trails. "Why do you do it?" Nora asked one afternoon as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "The drives, I mean. You are gone for months at a time, eating dust and risking your life for wages that barely keep you fed." "It is what I know," Preston said. "My father did it and his father before him. It is the family trade." "But is it what you want?" The question stopped him cold. No one had ever asked him that before. In his world, men did what they had to do, what circumstances demanded of them. Wanting something different was a luxury reserved for people with choices. "I do not know," he admitted finally. "I have never thought about it that way." "You should," Nora said firmly. "Life is too short to spend it doing something that does not feed your soul." "What feeds your soul?" "Music, creation, beauty." She plucked a blade of grass and twirled it between her fingers. "And lately, teaching you to harmonize properly." Preston felt his heart skip. "Lately, do not look so pleased with yourself. You still rush the tempo on anything faster than a waltz." But she was smiling, and when she started whistling again, it was a love song, slow and achingly tender. Preston hummed along, and for the first time in his 25 years, he understood what it meant to be truly happy. Marcus noticed the change in his brother immediately. "You are going to stay here, are you not?" he asked one evening as Preston helped him with his exercises, carefully moving the healing leg through its range of motion. "I have not decided anything yet." "You have decided. You just have not told her yet." Marcus grimaced as Preston bent his knee a bit too far. "Easy now." "I would like to keep the leg, thank you. Sorry." Preston released his brother's leg and sat back. "Do you think I am being foolish?" "I think you are being human. You have found something that matters to you, someone who matters." Marcus shifted into a more comfortable position. "But you need to be practical too. How will you support her?" Cattle driving takes you away for months at a time. That is no life for a married man. We have not talked about marriage. Preston, you have talked about everything but marriage. Anyone with eyes can see where this is heading." Marcus shook his head. "I am not saying do not do it. I am saying have a plan." That night, Preston lay awake thinking about the future. He had saved some money over the years, enough to perhaps start something small. Fort Davis was growing. New businesses opening every month as more settlers arrived. There were opportunities here for a man willing to work hard. But what could he do? He knew cattle and horses, knew the trails and the rivers and the best places to ford a swollen stream. How did that translate into a stable life in town? The answer came to him 2 days later, when he was helping Nora repair a broken section of her fence. The wood was rotting, the posts leaning at dangerous angles, and as Preston worked to set new posts, he realized he was good at this. He had spent years making camp, building temporary structures, fixing broken equipment on the trail. He knew his way around tools and materials. "I could be a carpenter," he said suddenly, standing up so quickly he nearly hit his head on the fence rail. "What?" Nora looked up from where she was painting the repaired sections. "A carpenter, a builder. There is so much construction happening in Fort Davis right now. New houses, new businesses. People need skilled labor." The words came faster as the idea took shape. "I could apprentice with someone, learn the trade properly. It would keep me here, give me a steady income." Nora set down her paintbrush carefully. "Is that what you want?" "I want to be where you are," Preston said honestly. "Everything else is just logistics." "Preston Sutherland, are you saying you want to court me properly?" "I am saying I want to spend the rest of my life humming along to your whistling. If that counts as courtship, then yes." Nora stood and walked over to him, paint smudges on her hands and a serious expression on her face. "I will not be a conventional wife if that is where this leads. I will not stop performing. I will not make myself smaller to fit someone else's expectations of what a woman should be. I would never ask that of you. Your music is part of who you are. It is part of what I love." The word hung in the air between them, huge and undeniable. Preston had not meant to say it quite so soon, but now that it was out, he could not take it back, did not want to take it back. "Love," Nora repeated softly. "That is a significant word. It is the right word." She looked at him for a long moment, her creek stone eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she smiled, genuinely and fully, and began to whistle. It was the same love song she had played by the cottonwood tree, but this time when Preston hummed along, she stepped forward and kissed him. It was a brief kiss, barely more than a brush of lips, but it sealed something between them that words could not have accomplished. When she pulled back, Preston was grinning like a fool. "I love you too," Nora said, in case that was not clear. "It was clear, but I appreciate the confirmation." They finished repairing the fence together, working in companionable silence broken occasionally by Nora's whistling and Preston's humming. When the work was done and the sun was beginning to set, Preston gathered his courage and asked the question that had been building in his mind for days. "Will you marry me, Nora Zimmerman?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the edge of her property and looked out at the Texas landscape, all dust and scrub brush and endless sky. Preston waited, his heart hammering in his chest, giving her the time she needed to decide. "Yes," she said finally, turning back to face him. "But we do it on our terms. I keep my name professionally. I keep performing. And you promise me that you will pursue work that actually makes you happy, not just work that pays the bills." "I promise all of that and more." Preston crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until they were both laughing. When he set her down, Nora immediately started whistling a celebratory march, and Preston hummed along, their voices carrying across the evening air. The next morning, Preston sought out Thomas McKenna, the best carpenter in Fort Davis. McKenna was a gruff Scotsman in his 50s with hands like worn leather and an eye for quality workmanship. He listened to Preston's request with minimal expression, then walked around him in a slow circle as if inspecting a horse he might purchase. "You ever done any building?" McKenna asked. "I have made camp structures, repaired chuck wagons, built temporary corrals. Nothing professional." "Can you follow directions without arguing?" "Yes, sir." "Can you work from dawn to dusk without complaining?" "I have done cattle drives. I can handle long days," McKenna grunted. "Come back tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp. Bring gloves. You will be doing the grunt work for the first 6 months, maybe longer. Pay will not be great, but if you prove yourself, I will teach you properly. After that, you can make a decent living." "Thank you, sir. I will not disappoint you." Preston practically ran back to Nora's house to tell her the news. He found her hanging laundry in her small backyard, whistling something cheerful and rhythmic that matched the movement of her arms as she pinned wet clothes to the line. "McKenna agreed to take me on," Preston announced, slightly out of breath. Nora dropped the shirt she was holding back into the basket and threw her arms around his neck. "That is wonderful. When do you start?" "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. He hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, which always smelled faintly of lavender. "I should tell Marcus. He will want to know the plan." But when Preston arrived back at the boarding house, he found Marcus sitting up in bed with a letter in his hands and a troubled expression on his face. "What is wrong?" Preston asked immediately. "Letter from home. Father has had a bad fall. He is recovering, but Mother says the ranch is suffering without him. She needs help." Marcus looked up at his brother. "I have to go back as soon as this leg is fully healed. Another few weeks, the doctor says. Of course, family comes first. She is asking for both of us, Preston. She says they need all the help they can get to keep the place running." The words hit Preston like a physical blow. He had been so focused on his new plans, his new life with Nora, that he had not considered what obligations might pull him away. But his parents were aging, the ranch was struggling, and family duty was not something to be taken lightly. "I need to think about this," Preston said slowly. "There is nothing to think about. Mother needs us." Marcus's voice was firm. "I know you have found someone here, but family is family." Preston sat down heavily on his own bed, his mind racing. He could not abandon his parents in their time of need, but the thought of leaving Nora, of giving up the future they had just started to build, felt like cutting off a limb. That evening he told Nora everything. They sat on her porch as the sun set, and Preston explained about his father's injury, his mother's letter, the ranch that was failing without proper help. "How long would you need to be there?" Nora asked quietly. "I do not know. Months, certainly. Maybe longer, depending on how bad things are." Preston took her hand. "Come with me to New Mexico." "Yes, we can marry before we go. You can perform there just as easily as here. We can build our life together wherever that needs to be." Nora was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkening street. "I have never been to New Mexico. I do not know anyone there. All my connections, my reputation as a performer, they are here in Texas. You could build new connections. Your talent would translate anywhere." Preston squeezed her hand. "I know it is asking a lot. It is asking everything." But her voice was not angry, just thoughtful. "Let me think about it, Preston. This is not a small decision." He left her that night with a heavy heart, uncertain whether he would lose her before they even had a chance to begin. Nora did not whistle for 3 days. Preston saw her around town, but she kept her lips pressed together, her face troubled. He gave her space, understanding that she needed to work through this on her own terms. Marcus grew stronger each day, his leg healing well, and the date of their departure drew closer with alarming speed. On the fourth day, Nora came to find Preston at the construction site where he had started working for McKenna. She stood at the edge of the property, watching him haul lumber, and when he saw her, he immediately set down his load and walked over. "I have made my decision," she said without preamble. "I will come with you to New Mexico." Relief flooded through Preston so strongly that his knees nearly buckled. "Truly, on one condition. We spend 1 year there helping your family get back on their feet. After that, we reevaluate. If staying is what makes sense, we stay. But if I am miserable if I cannot find my place there, we come back to Texas." She looked at him intently. "I will not sacrifice my entire life on an altar of duty that is not even mine. But I will sacrifice 1 year because I understand what family means and because I love you. That is more than fair, more than I deserve." Preston pulled her into his arms, not caring who might see. "We will make it work, Nora, I promise you that. Then we had better get married quickly. I will not travel with you as anything less than your wife. I have a reputation to maintain." She smiled then, and began to whistle the wedding march, slightly off-key with deliberate humor. Preston laughed and hummed along, and they stood there in the dusty construction site, planning their future with nothing but their voices and their determination. They were married 5 days later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Marcus as witness and half the town in attendance. Nora wore a cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, and Preston wore a borrowed suit that was slightly too small in the shoulders. The reverend kept the service short, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Nora whistled the first few bars of a joyful hymn, prompting spontaneous applause from the congregation. The reception was held at the social hall, with music and dancing and more food than Preston had seen in months. Nora performed several songs at the request of the guests, and Preston stood beside her, humming harmony, feeling as though his heart might burst from happiness. When they finally left the party near midnight, walking hand in hand to Nora's house, which was now their house, Preston felt that everything in his life had finally fallen into proper alignment. Their first night as a married couple was gentle and tentative, 2 people learning the geography of each other, the places that brought pleasure, the rhythms that felt right. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Nora's narrow bed, and she whistled softly in the darkness, a lullaby that carried them both into sleep. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity. They sold most of Nora's furniture, packing only what could fit in a wagon. Preston settled his affairs with McKenna, who grudgingly admitted that the young man had shown promise and would be welcome back if things did not work out in New Mexico. Marcus's leg continued to heal, and by the end of the 2nd week, the doctor pronounced him fit for travel. On a cool October morning, they set out for New Mexico. Marcus drove the wagon, his legs still too weak for riding, while Preston and Nora rode alongside on horseback. The journey would take nearly 2 weeks through rough country, but the weather was favorable and the roads relatively safe. As they left Fort Davis behind, Nora began to whistle a traveling song, something with a wandering melody that seemed to match the movement of the horses. Preston hummed along, and even Marcus joined in occasionally, his rough bass adding depth to their impromptu performance. Other travelers on the road would stop and stare as they passed, enchanted by the unusual sight of a whistling woman and her humming companions. They camped under the stars each night, and Preston taught Nora how to make proper cowboy coffee, while she taught him the words to songs she had only ever whistled. They talked about their hopes for the future, about the children they might have someday, about whether Preston might eventually own his own construction business, or whether Nora might be able to perform in larger venues in cities like Santa Fe or Albuquerque. "I want 3 children," Nora announced one night as they lay by the fire, looking up at the vast expanse of stars. "A boy first, then 2 girls." "Why that order?" Preston asked, amused. "The boy can help protect his sisters as they grow up, teach them to be strong and unafraid." She rolled onto her side to look at him. "And I want to teach them all to whistle. Can you imagine? A whole family of whistlers. We would be the most musical family in the territory." Preston kissed her forehead. 3 children sounds perfect." Marcus, who was supposed to be asleep on the other side of the fire, called out, "Just make sure you keep the whistling to reasonable hours. Some of us need our rest." They arrived at the Sutherland Ranch on a gray afternoon in late October. The property was smaller than Preston remembered, the house in need of repair, the fences sagging. His mother came out to greet them, her face lined with worry and exhaustion. She was a small woman, barely taller than Nora, with steel-gray hair and the kind of strength that came from necessity rather than choice. "Preston, Marcus, thank God you are here." She embraced her sons fiercely, then turned to Nora with curiosity. "And who is this?" "Mother, this is my wife, Nora. We were married 2 weeks ago." Preston put his arm around Nora's waist. "Nora, this is my mother, Elizabeth Sutherland." Elizabeth's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. "Your wife? Well, that is certainly news." She studied Nora carefully, taking in the travel-worn clothes and the confident posture. "Can you cook?" "Adequately," Nora replied evenly. "Can you whistle?" "What kind of question is that?" "The kind that tells me whether we will get along." Nora smiled then, warm and genuine. "I am a performer, Mrs. Sutherland. I whistle for a living and I am quite good at it. Your son fell in love with me because of my music. If that is going to be a problem, we should address it now." Elizabeth looked at her son, then back at Nora, then let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, I think we will get along just fine. Come inside, all of you. Your father is resting, but he will want to see you." The house was tidy but worn, every surface showing signs of hard use and insufficient maintenance. Preston's father lay in the main bedroom, his legs splinted and his face pale. He had fallen while repairing the barn roof 3 weeks earlier, and the injury had been severe enough to keep him bedridden. "Preston," his father said, his voice weak but relieved. "And Marcus?" "Good, good. We need all the help we can get around here." Preston introduced Nora, and his father's reaction was similar to his mother's, a mixture of surprise and curiosity. But when Nora whistled a gentle tune, something soft and healing, the old man's face relaxed, and he closed his eyes with a small smile. "She can stay," he pronounced, and that was that. The first months in New Mexico were harder than Nora had anticipated. The ranch work was relentless, with animals to tend and repairs to make, and a dozen other tasks that seemed to multiply overnight. She helped where she could, learning to cook for a household of 5, to mend work clothes that were torn beyond what seemed repairable, to manage a kitchen garden that fought against the harsh climate. But it was the isolation that wore on her most. There were no social halls nearby, no opportunities to perform, no community of musicians and artists. The nearest town was a 3-hour ride, too far for casual visits. She found herself whistling more and more, using music as a lifeline to her former self, to the woman she had been in Fort Davis. Preston noticed her unhappiness and tried to help. He would finish his work as quickly as possible each day so they could spend evenings together, riding out to a hilltop where they could watch the sunset and make music together. His humming had grown richer and more complex over the months, and they could now harmonize in ways that were genuinely beautiful. But even these moments could not fully compensate for what she had lost. "I am trying," she told him one night, tears streaming down her face. "I am trying so hard to be happy here, but Preston, I feel like I am disappearing." "I know, I see it." He held her tightly. 6 more months, that was our agreement. 6 more months and then we reevaluate. But fate had other plans. In early spring, Nora realized she was pregnant. The discovery was both joyful and terrifying, adding another layer of complexity to their situation. A baby would make leaving more difficult, would tie them more firmly to this place and this life. "We are having a child," she told Preston, her hand on her still flat stomach. "What do we do now?" Preston's face lit up with wonder. "We are, truly." He placed his own hand over hers, his eyes suddenly wet. "That is incredible, Nora. That is the best news I have ever received. But our agreement, our plan to leave if things did not work out. Plans change. Life changes." Preston kissed her gently. "But your happiness still matters, maybe more than ever. If you need to leave, we will find a way to make it work. My parents are doing better now. The ranch is stabilizing. Marcus can stay and help them. You would do that. Leave your family for me." "You are my family now. You and our baby." Preston pulled her close. "Wherever you need to be, that is where we will go." But Nora did not answer immediately. Something was shifting inside her, a recognition that perhaps she had been looking at their situation all wrong. She had been so focused on what she had lost that she had not seen what she might be able to create. Over the next few weeks, as her pregnancy began to show, Nora started exploring the area more thoroughly. She rode into the nearby town and introduced herself to shopkeepers and residents. She learned that there was a small church that had no regular music for services, a school that wanted to add music education, a community hungry for entertainment and culture. "I could teach," she told Preston excitedly one evening. "I could offer lessons in music, maybe even organize concerts. The town is small, but it is growing. There is opportunity here if I create it myself. You would want to stay. I would want to try staying. Really try, not just endure." She placed his hand on her growing belly. "Our child will need roots, Preston, a place to call home. Maybe that place can be here." So Nora began to build a new life. She started offering music lessons in the town, teaching children to sing and carry tunes properly. She organized a small choir for the church and began planning a summer concert series. Word spread about the woman who could whistle any tune, and soon people were traveling from neighboring towns to hear her perform. Her performances now were different from her days in Fort Davis. Instead of providing dance music at social halls, she gave proper concerts, showcasing her unusual talent in ways that felt more like art than entertainment. Preston would accompany her on these occasions, his humming providing a rich foundation for her whistling, and their partnership became something of a local legend. Their son was born in late summer, a healthy baby with powerful lungs and Preston's dark hair. They named him Peter, and from his earliest days he was surrounded by music. Nora would whistle lullabies to him, and Preston would hum along, and the baby would fall asleep to the sound of his parents' voices blending in perfect harmony. Elizabeth proved to be a doting grandmother, and even Preston's father, recovered now from his injury, showed a softness around the baby that Preston had rarely seen. The ranch continued to thrive with the whole family working together, and gradually, Nora found that her initial resistance to this life was transforming into genuine appreciation. "I never thought I would be happy in such a remote place," she confessed to Preston one night as they sat on their porch, baby Peter sleeping peacefully inside. "I thought I needed a big town, lots of opportunities, constant stimulation, but this feels right. Building something from nothing, creating community where there was none before. "You have given this place something it did not know it needed," Preston said. "Music, beauty, culture. You have made it better just by being here. We made it better. Together." She began to whistle softly, a new melody she had been composing, something that captured the vast openness of New Mexico, the stark beauty of the landscape, the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. Preston hummed along, picking up the melody as he always did, adding his own variations. They sat that way for a long time, making music in the darkness, their voices carrying across the quiet ranch. The years passed in a rhythm of work and music, hardship and joy. Their daughter Clara was born 2 years after Peter, and then another daughter, Sarah, 2 years after that. Each child learned to whistle from Nora and to hum from Preston, and the house was constantly filled with music. Family dinners became impromptu concerts, with everyone contributing their voices to create complex harmonies that were wholly unique to the Sutherland family. Preston's construction skills, learned briefly in Fort Davis and expanded through constant practice on the ranch, became valuable to the growing community. He took on projects in town, building houses and businesses, earning a reputation for quality craftsmanship. The additional income allowed them to expand their own house, adding rooms for the children and a proper music room for Nora where she could teach and practice. Nora's concerts grew more ambitious and more popular. She began traveling to perform in larger towns, sometimes taking Preston with her, sometimes going alone when the children were old enough. She performed at the territorial capital in Santa Fe, impressing officials and artists alike with her extraordinary talent. Offers came for her to move to larger cities to pursue a career on a grander stage, but she always turned them down. "My life is here," she would say. "My family, my community, my roots. I have everything I need." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Nora with a trip back to Fort Davis. They left the children with Elizabeth and Marcus, who had never married and still lived on the ranch, and made the 2-week journey back to the town where they had met. Fort Davis had grown in the intervening years, with new buildings and more residents, but much of it was still familiar. They visited the creek where they had first sat together, the social hall where they had danced, the house that had been Nora's before she became Nora Sutherland. "Do you ever regret it?" Preston asked as they stood outside what was now someone else's home. "Leaving this place, giving up the life you had built here?" Nora considered the question seriously. "I regret nothing. I miss certain things sometimes, the ease of having everything established, the convenience of town life. But what we have built together is so much more valuable than anything I had here alone." She took his hand. "You gave me partnership, Preston. You never asked me to be smaller. You celebrated my gifts and built your life around accommodating them. How could I regret that?" "I fell in love with you the first time I heard you whistle," Preston said. "Fell in love slowly, over weeks of learning songs and harmonizing, of discovering who you were beyond the music. And I fall in love with you again every single day." Nora began to whistle then, the same chop-in nocturne she had been whistling the day they met, all those years ago. Preston hummed along, his voice deeper now but still perfectly in tune, and they stood together in front of the house where Nora's independent life had ended and their shared life had begun. They stayed in Fort Davis for a week, reconnecting with old friends and showing each other the people they had been before they became who they were together. Then they returned to New Mexico, to their children and their community, and the life they had built from nothing but love and determination and music. Peter grew into a serious boy with a gift for carpentry like his father, but he could whistle complex classical pieces by the time he was 8. Clara was wild and joyful, more interested in horses than music, but she could hum harmony like nobody's business. Sarah, the youngest, had Nora's exact gift, able to reproduce any tune perfectly after hearing it just once. Nora poured extra attention into Sarah's training, teaching her not just how to whistle but how to perform, how to command a room, how to use her gift to bring beauty into the world. As the children grew older and more independent, Nora and Preston found new ways to collaborate musically. They began composing together, with Nora creating melodies and Preston developing harmonies. They performed these original pieces at concerts, and some of them became popular enough that other musicians in the territory started playing them. "We should write them down properly," Preston suggested one evening as they worked on a particularly complex piece. "Find someone who knows musical notation and preserve them." "Why?" Nora asked. "Music is meant to be heard, not read. Because these songs are our legacy. Because someday we will be gone, and I want some evidence that we existed, that we created something beautiful together." Preston took her hand. "Because I want our great-grandchildren to know what their ancestors sounded like." So they found a music teacher in Santa Fe who agreed to transcribe their compositions. Over the course of several visits, Nora whistled and Preston hummed while the teacher frantically scribbled notes on staff paper. When they were finished, they had 12 complete pieces, ranging from simple folk tunes to complex orchestral arrangements adapted for voice. "The Sutherland Collection," the teacher dubbed it. "These are genuinely good, you know, not just novelties but real compositions with artistic merit." The validation meant more to Nora than she expected. She had spent so many years being known as the woman who could whistle, as if her gift were merely a trick or a curiosity. To have someone recognize it as true artistry, as something with lasting value, felt like a vindication of every choice she had made. Elizabeth Sutherland passed away peacefully in her sleep when she was 78, surrounded by her family. At the funeral, Nora whistled a hymn so beautiful and so mournful that there was not a dry eye in the church. Preston hummed the harmony, his voice breaking occasionally with grief, and their children joined in, creating a sound that seemed to transcend the mortal world. "Mother would have loved that," Marcus said afterward, embracing his brother. "She always said you two made magic together." Preston's father followed his wife a year later, and the ranch officially passed to Marcus, who had devoted his life to keeping it running. Preston and Nora, by then in their mid-40s, had built a comfortable life in town. Preston's construction business was thriving, and Nora's teaching practice and performance schedule kept her constantly engaged. But they never forgot where they came from, the early struggles and the gradual building of something meaningful. They never forgot the creek in Fort Davis where they had first made music together, or the promise Preston had made that Nora would never have to make herself smaller. Peter married a local girl and took over Preston's construction business, expanding it to include projects throughout the territory. Clara shocked everyone by running off to Denver with a traveling photographer, but she sent regular letters home and seemed genuinely happy. Sarah became a professional performer, traveling throughout the Southwest, and even occasionally performing in Chicago and New York, always billing herself as the whistling wonder of the West. Preston and Nora grew old together gracefully. His hair turned silver, and her creek-stone eyes developed wrinkles at the corners from years of smiling. But they still made music together every single day, still sat on their porch in the evenings whistling and humming, creating beauty out of air and love and time. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a massive celebration. There was a parade and a concert, and a banquet with speeches from what seemed like half the territory. Sarah came home from her tour to perform, and Peter and his children provided backup harmonies. Even Clara made the trip from Denver with her photographer husband and their 4 children. 50 years, Preston marveled as they danced together at the celebration, moving slowly to a waltz that Nora whistled while somehow still dancing. Half a century of music and love. "And we are not finished yet," Nora said firmly. "I have at least 20 more years of songs in me. Then I have 20 more years of humming. I could not possibly stop now." They danced until the moon was high and the music finally ended, surrounded by family and friends and a community that they had helped to build. When the celebration finally wound down near midnight, they walked home hand in hand, just as they had on their wedding night 50 years earlier. "Do you remember the first song I ever whistled for you?" Nora asked as they settled onto their porch one final time that night. "The Chopin Nocturne. Of course I remember. Whistle it with me now. One more time." So they did, their voices blending in the darkness, creating the same magic they had created 5 decades earlier. The melody floated across the quiet town, a testament to love and music and the extraordinary things that can happen when two people harmonize perfectly. Preston Sutherland died in his sleep at the age of 79, with Nora's hand in his, and the sound of her whistling the last thing he heard. She continued living for another 7 years, teaching music and performing occasionally, always keeping Preston's memory alive through the songs they had created together. When Nora Zimmerman Sutherland finally passed at 86, the entire territory mourned. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched with her music. Sarah performed, whistling the same hymn her mother had whistled at Elizabeth's funeral years before, and Peter hummed the harmony his father had always provided, his own voice breaking with the same grief. They buried her next to Preston on a hilltop overlooking the ranch, and the inscription on their shared headstone reads simply, "They made music together." Years later, their great-grandchildren would discover the Sutherland collection in an archive in Santa Fe. The compositions would be arranged for various instruments and performed by orchestras throughout the Southwest. Music historians would write papers about the unusual partnership between the whistling woman and her humming cowboy, about how they had created art in an unlikely place during an unlikely time. But perhaps the greatest legacy Preston and Nora left behind was not their music at all, but the lesson that love requires two people willing to harmonize, to blend their individual voices into something greater than either could create alone. They had built a life on that principle, sustained it through hardship and joy, and proved that with enough dedication and mutual respect, any two people could make magic together. The house in town eventually became a museum, preserved exactly as it had been during their lives. The music room remained the centerpiece, with its worn piano bench and the stack of sheet music covered in penciled notations. Visitors would stand in that room and imagine the sounds that had once filled it, the whistling and humming that had created beauty out of thin air. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind was just right, people swore they could hear music drifting from that hilltop where Preston and Nora lay buried together. A whistle and a hum blending in perfect harmony, creating songs that would echo through eternity.